I'm going to give it a couple more minutes because there's over 400 people in already, and I know that there were many more than that who had signed up. So if you will bear with us, thank you. Okay, well, we're at 4:50 and there's still a few people joining, but in order to keep within the time, I think it'd be a good idea to start. Just a couple of items of housekeeping up front. Please, you can see in the chat, post your questions to the speakers throughout the session in the Q&A window. You can upvote your favorite questions as well. And then just to say, so to make sure that we're answering the most appropriate and hottest topics, please note today's session is also being recorded and will be made available to all attendees via the Eventbrite online event page. So you will get an email alert when that's ready. And we're actually live on YouTube as well because there are more people who have signed up than we can actually take. So thank you very much indeed for such an amazing response. I'm David Partridge. I'm chairman of the governance board of the Standard. And I'd like to welcome all of you to this technical update and consultation. I'm here really at the beginning, sitting in for Clara Bagenal-George, who is the chair of the technical steering group. I'm sure you will know. She can't join us, unfortunately, today due to not being well enough to do so, but she and all of the other presenters and all of the various members of the technical steering group have done an absolutely incredible job bringing all this together. So my first job is to thank her and to thank all the other members of the steering group, most of whom are speaking, for incredible amount that they've put into this. And I know that she has asked me to give you all a message to thank you for the incredible response that we have had from everybody who has participated either in the work of the Standard Up to Date or who has been so interested in it that you're continuing to be involved. As I say, we've had an incredible response. It's still at 575 and counting now. So welcome to all of you. If you do miss these early bits, as I say, there will be a recorded session which you can check out either on the Eventbrite or on YouTube. So I will hand over now to Katie and come back a little bit later to join in some of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm Katie Clements-Jackson. I'm the Technical Project Manager for the Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. And I'm just going to talk us through the agenda and some of the technical fundamentals for the standard. So today in this session, we're going to be covering the technical update and the consultation, which were made available in June via the Net Zero Carbon Building Standard website. We're going to talk a little bit about the next steps. And at the end of this session, there's going to be time for questions. So please make sure you're entering those into the Q&A box. We're going to have a range of presenters from the technical steering group, as well as David from the governance board today, and they're going to introduce themselves at the start of their section. So we're looking forward to seeing those people later on. So I'm going to now introduce the webinar. So as I've mentioned, in June, our information issue went live, and there were two key parts to that. There was the technical update and then the consultation. So we're going to be providing more information about each of those throughout this webinar. And you can also download and read these in full on the website. First of all, I just want to set the context of this information issue within the overall plan for the standard. So this timeline for the standard starts from when the principle of the standard was founded, and it goes all the way to the beta test version of the standard that we're working towards. And you can see we are here at the moment. We've just issued the technical update and consultation in terms of the governance side of the standard. And from the technical perspective, that includes the production of new build performance levels for operational energy and embodied carbon. And we really want to get your views on these through the consultation. So this is a really key moment for the standard, where we're trying to take stock of what we've done so far and get feedback from the industry in order to develop it to the next stage. What we'll be doing with these new build performance levels is feeding them into the next stage of the process to create the net zero carbon limits. So this diagram is showing our progress towards the net zero carbon limits. This is going to be a combination of what we're calling top-down budgets, creating a carbon budget within 1.5 degree aligned climate trajectories. I'm going to have more information on that later on. And we're going to then be reconciling those with bottom-up performance levels, which are based on data that we've gathered from the industry through our call for evidence. And where we are at the moment, as you can see, is we're creating a limit setting tool for that top-down work stream to be able to set individual carbon limits and budgets for each sector. And we just prepared the new build performance levels. It's worth flagging, and we'll hear more about those performance levels later on. These are not the same as the limits, and also not all of the performance levels are available for every sector, because this is due to the availability of data that we were able to collect, but we'll hear more on that later on. I just want to take this moment within the webinar to say a massive thank you. We couldn't be where we are at this point without a lot of work from a huge amount of people throughout the industry. Thank you so much to all of our volunteers. It's the inspiration and the commitment of these volunteers that are making the development of this standard possible. And they've been working tirelessly to bring you this update and consultation that we'll be talking about today. So massive thank you, and we and the industry all appreciate your contributions. So I'm now going to talk us through the sort of aspects of the technical update before I hand over to some others to go into more detail. First of all, this is the structure that you'll see on our website. The technical update is split into various different sections, which you can download individually or you can download the full document. And we're going to cover some of the key topics in this session. First of all, I want to go through some really fundamental topics that we flagged in the consultation document that we're really interested in hearing the industry's view on at the moment. So there are three key areas of our technical fundamentals section. The first of these is our definition of net zero carbon. So it's really important for us to agree on this at this stage so that we can make sure the industry is aligned. Our technical update document provides full information on the definition that we've created for net zero carbon. So we really want to get your input on that. Some of the key definitions within that are defined in this diagram here, because there's quite a lot to that definition. I'm not going to go through it now, but I just want to draw your attention to it so that you can comment on it via the consultation. The second key topic, which is part of the definition of net zero carbon, is about what role offsetting plays. So what we're trying to decide at the moment is whether to be net zero carbon, a building should be meeting operational energy and embodied carbon limits that are aligned with the 1.5 degree climate trajectory, whether that alone is enough or whether it also needs to acquire offsetting to match the residual emissions. Now, there's quite a lot of pros and cons associated with this, whether we should incorporate offsetting or not, and those are set out within the technical update document. So we really want to hear from a broad range of people across the industry on your views on this, whether we should have offsetting required, not required, or some combination of both options being available. The third topic that's a really fundamental and we want to get your views on is this whole building approach to net zero carbon. So the current proposal within the standard is to adopt a whole building approach. So net zero carbon will only be able to be achieved at an entire building level and not within separate demises within the building. We appreciate this might not be ideal for certain sectors such as offices and retail. And so it's really important at this moment to get input from across the industry to understand which option we should be progressing with and to feed into our decision making. In the consultation, there's a series of questions on this topic to help us understand your views and your rationale. So please make sure that you engage with those. I've now covered all of the high-level fundamentals that we wanted to draw your attention to. So I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's going to present the next section on technical requirements. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, I'm Christine Powell. I'm on the technical steering group for this project and chair the carbon accounting task group. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of what the technical requirements around the standard are. In the update, we describe what the requirements are and the metrics we're going to use. These are around particularly embodied carbon, where we have limits for new build, retrofit, and refit. Also, another key element is the operational energy limits. Also, there will be requirements about fossil fuel operation. We've got some questions on that. And another aspect that we think is quite important for the standard is around demand management and flexibility, where it's important for buildings to interact with the grid to maximize renewables. Another aspect is about on-site renewables, also limits for refrigerant gases, and also within the update, we talk about how these requirements will apply to district and heating networks. So the specific questions we're asking there are around whether you think the proposed metrics we're putting forward are the right ones, and whether you've got any sort of wider comments about the proposed approach. Just a bit here about how the limits will apply to retrofit in existing buildings. For operational energy, we're proposing that the same limit will be set for existing buildings and retrofits. And the logic behind this is that it's about achieving the outcome, and it can potentially be achieved with or without retrofit. So for that reason, we're putting forward the idea that it should be just one limit. However, where existing buildings have already been verified by the standard as a new build, and in those cases, the operational energy limits will probably be significantly more stringent, they will still have to meet the limit set for the new build. So specific questions we've got there are around where the operational energy limits should end. So should the endpoint for operational energy limits be the same for new and existing and retrofit buildings? And also another thing that we need to sort of decide what the right way forward for is whether the operational limits for existing buildings and retrofits should tighten over time. What reasons there are for making the emissions reduce more later in time. Embodied carbon limits are discussed in more detail in later sections. And I also need to mention that that heritage buildings, we've not detailed how they're going to be dealt with in the technical update, but there are specific processes being developed by a heritage group who are specifically looking at this aspect. The last thing I'm just going to say is about on-site renewable. Clearly, having renewable electricity generation on site, we want to encourage it to support decarbonisation of the grid, but there is the issue of embodied carbon within the for the electricity generation equipment. So we're looking to deal with that by having having a limit set for on-site electricity generation equipment within the standard. We've got some questions around that within the consultation. So first one is obviously what should the requirements be for on-site renewables? What metric should we use? And also, we're asking about proposed target ranges for on-site renewables that we're putting forward. Are they about right, or are they too ambitious? And finally, what are the conditions where maybe a building doesn't have to meet the on-site renewable generation targets? I think that's it from me. So that for technical requirements. So I think I'll hand over to Will now. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Will Arnold. I work for the Institution of Structural Engineers as Head of Climate Action. I sit on the technical steering group, and I've also been leading the task group looking at embodied carbon. And I should also say at this point that this is the first of 2 times you'll hear from me, because I'm going to be leading the Q&A at the end of this session. And so a reminder, if you're writing your questions into the chat, please take them out of there and put them into the Q&A, because I'm only going to have the ability to look at one window at once when they get there. And if you are looking in Q&A, please upvote any questions that you'd like to see answered. So we'll prioritise getting to them first. So I'm going to talk briefly about the sort of overall performance levels bit, and then I'm going to move on to embodied carbon. Just to reiterate what's been said already, when we talk about performance levels, we're not talking about limit setting at this point in time. If you just click again, please, Katie. We're looking at the expected performance of projects, in essence. So we talked about this top-down and bottom-up piece of work. When we talk about the performance levels, we talk about this bottom-up thing. So this is assessment of performance that we think we can expect of our projects and our buildings based on what we can design today and in the future. And that will eventually be paired with the top-down sort of budget setting piece of work. And those combined will give us our targets and our limits, but we're not there yet. This next slide shows the different ways that we approach operational energy and embodied carbon for this bit of work, and there's similarities and differences. As mentioned, they both are meant to represent an assessment of what could be achieved. But on the operational energy side of things, the work was based around a few different things. So we had benchmark of existing building stock. We looked at metered data from case studies, and we pulled out some energy performance modeling. And because we got that breadth of projects and over a couple of thousand projects, that's enabled us to set some performance levels out in terms of both best practice today on a project, as well as anticipating what a sort of future exemplar could look like. On the embodied carbon side of things, though, we didn't do all of this sort of performance modeling and so on. And obviously, as an industry, I'd say we're less mature in our understanding of embodied than we are of operational. So the embodied carbon side of things was based purely on submitted data that came through. We assume this data to be somewhere between the mean and the best practice, because it's going to be a bit skewed based on the sorts of clients who have asked for this to be tracked in the past. And therefore, we just give performance levels in terms of the sort of data received, so the range, the percentiles, and the average values within that. So to dig a bit deeper into embodied, firstly to say that we received about 800 projects in total worth of embodied carbon data, and about 500-ish of those was new build data that we were able to use for this piece of work. The refurb work's been parked to the next phase, and we'll come back to that in due course, but for now we're just looking at new build projects. And you'll see from the pie charts on the right that most of the data was at REBA stages 4 or 5. So it's quite well developed data, hopefully fairly well understood by the teams who are submitting. There's a few sort of key issues to run through with the data. So the first thing to highlight is that the embodied carbon data is only sort of data measured within the building curtilage. So it doesn't include infrastructure and public realm. We got very little data that went beyond the red line of the building itself. And about 2/3 of the data we received actually came from 2 structural engineering firms who've been keeping really good records over recent years, and that's Price & Myers and Smith & Warwick, so big thank you to them. Of course, what this means is that we had a lot less information for non-structural disciplines, and I'll just touch on that more in a second. We didn't get very much data in terms of in-use embodied carbon or end-of-life embodied carbon for most projects. So that left us in the position of not really being able to understand anything beyond upfront embodied carbon. And it's worth flagging that even for upfront embodied carbon, there were actually 4 sectors where we were really, really lacking in data, which is retail, hotels, data centres and sports and leisure. And so you'll see as you go through the consultation document that there's plenty of ways to submit more data for those sectors now. And if you do have embodied carbon data for those, please do get in touch, because until we have data for those sectors, it's going to be quite hard to be able to set embodied carbon limits for them. In terms of what we did with sort of processing the data, as I said, we had gaps in the data where we only had certain sectors completed. So typically this was structures only, but sometimes we received just some facade data or just some fit out data. And so we had to fill in the gaps. So what we did was we created averages based on the data we did have. So for example, on this slide, projects 1 and 3, we took their numbers for substructure and worked out what the average looked like for that. And then we basically backfilled those averages to fill in the gaps. So this gave us some sort of notionally complete data sets. That meant that we could do analysis on the whole building level. We're obviously wary of the fact that we've filled in the blanks with the averages, but we felt that at this point in time, it's better than having gaps there. We also did a similar sort of process in terms of backfilling where data was insufficient for a certain sector or a certain discipline. So for example, in the healthcare sector, we didn't have much good data in terms of facades. So we made the assumption for now that there'd be roughly the same kilograms of carbon per square metre within healthcare as there is, say, in offices, and we just took the offices number and copied it across. And within the documentation, we've laid out exactly what we've copied to where. So if you have comments on that, please feedback through the consultation. And I should just say at this point, massive thank you to Marika Gabbianelli from WSP and Adam Gravely from Future Homes Hub, who led on this bit of work. Really complex piece of work, particularly given all the different sources of data that we pulled in at the start to try and get our big data set together. So thank you to the two of you. In terms of how we displayed the data in the document that you can download, it's shown in a few ways. We've listed out the numbers numerically. We obviously haven't included project by project, so these are all sort of summarized. We have to keep the projects anonymous and so on. We've done it numerically. We've also put in histograms and so on, so you can sort of get a bit of an understanding of the range of the different data sets. And bear in mind, like I say, these are all notionally complete, and you'll notice that those 4 sectors I mentioned before are missing from this at this point in time. We'd love that, when we next do something like this, they've been filled in to match everything else. And basically the feedback we're after from you all is whether the numbers are as you would expect. So based on your own project experience, do these seem to be the right sort of order of magnitude? If yes or no, do you have sort of evidence to support that you could share with us? And if you have data, you can send it to us through the BECD or via an email. Which takes us to the penultimate slide on embodied. Just to say there's a bunch of other sort of key areas that we looked at as well during the last 6 months or so, mostly beginning with R, but we also looked at sort of future decarbonisation of materials and so on. That's all laid out within the documentation. The only thing I would flag on this slide is to say that you'll notice on the bottom left, we talk about refit, also known as repeated fit outs during the life of a building. And we realised that we're quite interested in this, particularly for the office, retail and hotel sectors, because they have quite a high turnover of materials. There's a lot of wastage typically in that. And actually that can add up to a really considerable amount of embodied carbon. So we've got a bit of a call out for data on that, because we're going to try and dig a bit deeper at the next stage and see whether or not it would be possible to try and work towards setting limits for refit, maybe just in those sectors as we go forwards. So final slide for me is basically just to say there's a couple of sort of next steps depending on why you joined us today. Obviously, if you have no interest in embodied carbon, you don't have to do any of these things. And the consultation has been set up so that most questions are optional, so you can just sort of skip this bit. But if you do have opinions on those embodied carbon performance levels I showed, please do go into the consultation and let us know what you think. If you can, try and justify this with evidence and data and point us to places what we should go and look at in case we've missed anything. If you have embodied carbon data, particularly for those 4 sectors, retail, data centres, hotels and sports and leisure, please get in touch. You'll see there's 2 ways to send this to us. You can either fill in the BECD, which has been opened again for this process, or you can send us a LETI proforma to that email address that's on the screen. If you don't have a LETI proforma, you can just email us and we'll send you a blank one. But we'd love to fill those gaps. And finally, if you feel you can help in terms of this sort of refit embodied carbon data issue, please get in touch again with the same email address. So thank you very much. With that, I'm going to hand over to Julie, who's going to talk about the operational energy side of things.
Hi everyone, I'm Julie Godefroy, Head of Net Zero Policy at CBS, and I'll take you through the equivalent of wheels section, but on operational energy performance levels. So broadly speaking, here's the approach that we've taken. It's slightly different from embodied carbon because of the level of understanding and data availability. The first step essentially is all the sector groups have done a lot of work to define and analyze their sector and subsectors. There was a lot of data analysis as well on projects and data sources received, then energy performance modeling, and that led to the new build performance levels. But in more detail, step one is what we call defining the sector profile. So what subsectors would be subject to different performance levels? For example, primary and secondary schools would be two different subsectors, and defining the associated core and special end uses. For example, every school will have teaching spaces, but some may or may not have a swimming pool, and that would be associated with different allowances for the energy performance levels. Step two is the performance metrics. All of the sectors are proposing their performance levels in kilowatt hours per square meter per GIA equivalent for annual energy use, but at the asset level, slightly different metrics could be used, for example, per square meter of sales area. And some sectors are also proposing space heating or space cooling demand metrics, etc. Step three is defining, roughly speaking, benchmarks of the existing stock from median and best practice, and also populating that with step four, the projects that we've received from the call for evidence. Again, we have received masses of data, both large data sets and individual projects. So thank you very much to everyone who submitted that, because we know it takes a long time to gather all that data. Then sector groups carried out energy performance modeling. I stress energy performance, not parterre modeling. And that led to step six, the new build performance levels, which are being proposed as current best practice, as if for a project that would be at the design stage today, or a much more stretching, ambitious scenario, which we call future exemplar. That's the approach that we've taken throughout. And you will see in the pack that the sector groups have been divided essentially in three groups. So some have a reasonably high level of completeness and confidence on the performance levels. They have a lot of modeling, data, comparisons with industry references, etc. Some have some draft performance levels, but less complete and with less confidence. And finally, there are some sectors which do not yet have their performance levels, but I would like to stress it's not at all due to lack of work or progress, but there are sectors that we understand much less well, where typically there are no benchmarks available, where information is not really shared publicly. And so that first step of sector analysis is really very important. Getting your views on that is as important as for the other groups. Thank you. What you will see in the pack is for each sector, 2 slides. So here they're blank, but I'll take you through what to look out for and what we're looking for detail. So every sector, you will see what subsectors they are proposing and the associated end users. You will also see what metrics they are proposing to use and what they think are the existing stock benchmarks in median and best practice. All of these we do want your comments on. As well as you will see, as I've said, that some of the groups are proposing new build performance levels for best practice today and or for future exemplar. So all of these are very important questions in their own right that we'd really like your comments on. Thank you. The second slide is more background information that tells you how the sectors have arrived at that. So what sources of data they have used, what projects they have found that meet or not the performance level, what kind of modeling they have done, how they've accounted for the performance gap. And also under future development, what are the next steps that they're proposing in order to finalize the performance levels. Again, please have a look at this. And if you were really very keen, you will also see that in addition to these slides, some sectors have provided full reports that are available on a separate drive. Next, please. Thank you. So to recap what we're looking for in operational energy, you can comment on the overall approach for all the sectors. So that's sector analysis followed by performance level approach. You can also comment much more specifically about one and only sector if you want. As Will said, most of the questions are optional. So what subsector do you think they make sense? Are we using the right metrics? Do you agree with the benchmarks? And where there are proposed performance levels, do you think they are about right, too ambitious, not ambitious enough? Where you comment, especially on the numbers, please can you provide data and evidence? So for example, you could think a performance level is not ambitious enough because you've already achieved it on a couple of in-use buildings. Here's the data. And as importantly as your opinion, please can you let us know if you can help at least some sectors with further work, for example, modeling. Thank you. And I will leave, sorry, I should have done the transition. And Jess will now take you through the top-down work.
Thank you so much, Julie. So we've heard huge amounts of work that's gone on in this work stream, which we're calling the bottom-up work. In tandem, the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard has been progressing work on the top-down perspective. So I'm just going to very briefly recap what this means, what we've done to date and what the next steps are. This very rapid summary. Next slide, please. So we have been developing this work stream in Task Group 1C. So I failed to introduce myself. I'm terribly sorry. I represent the RIBA on the technical steering group, and I am co-lead with Tom Wig from UKGBC on the task group that's looking at the top-down work. And what this means, we're looking at developing science-based methods and principles of how the remaining UK carbon budget from now until 2050 that we have as a nation to spend, if you like, how that gets apportioned to the built environment versus other industries. And it's worth pointing out that there is no precedent or set methodology within the UK or internationally for how that is done. So this is very much looking at establishing a way of doing this, and then looking at how that carbon budget and energy budget for the built environment gets further subdivided across the various typologies or sectors that you find across the urban environment. So to do this work, if we could have the next slide up, please. We have been developing three key strands of this work, developing a stock model for the UK, which is the whole quantum of UK construction and the projections from now until 2050. Looking at more detail, the review of the carbon budget and the energy budgets for the UK, and then looking at the principles and methodology of downscaling at this work. So where we are now is that we've been looking at this methodology and the downscaling principles. This is going to inform a functional tool to calculate and help derive those limit pathways. Once we have established those, we're going to be balancing the budgets and balancing the books, if you like, in tandem with the bottom-up work, which will then produce the net zero carbon targets and limits that will be, the fundamental essence of the standard. Now, so this is sort of the process we're at the moment, and this work is going on over the summer. So with this, and I do know that there's some questions in the chat, which will be picked up in the Q&A, but at the moment I'll hand over to Matt, who's going to be covering the next section.
Actually, Jess, it's David. I've got to do a little bit on the consultation before Matt takes us on to next steps. But thanks to everybody who's presented. And you can see there's an extraordinary amount of work in there. It's a pretty quick canter through tons and tons and tons of information, which is actually in the consultation and the technical update itself. So this is how we would like you to respond, if you can, please. And by the way, we've already had 135 people who've responded, and then over 700 on this webinar itself. So we really do need to hear from you. We want you to talk, if you can, please, about the overall technical proposals themselves. Remember, we aren't actually setting limits and budgets at this time. We're just telling you what we have heard from the from the market, from the people who are actually doing or all the work on a daily basis. And we would also like to hear from you as to whether or not how achievable those new build performance levels are that are out there. We'd like to hear from absolutely everybody who's in the built environment and the real estate sector. It's important that we get both technical and overarching questions, and I can see that there are a lot of those already that are in both the chat and the Q&A. So please, all of you who have a chance, who are interested in this, please get involved. It's essential for the standard to be adopted by the entire industry. So we want to hear from you, and this is your chance for us to take your thoughts and comments and to put them back into the next levels, into the next piece of work. You've also heard from people asking for individual bits and pieces of information on various sectors, and indeed some individuals who might be able to help us to contribute further to take the work we've done today and turn it into the actual performance levels which will underpin the standard themselves. So please get in touch if you can help on either of those areas. And also, please do be aware that we're not asking you to answer every single question in the questionnaire. Those of you who've managed to find it, there's a few questions, again, I can see in the chat where you haven't been able to download it. You can skip through the topics that you don't have, you're not interested in. Go to the ones that really make a bit of a difference to you. And also, equally importantly, please make sure you tell us where you're coming from, because in order for us to be able to demonstrate that we've heard from across the whole industry, we want to see which are the issues that are of most concern to which aspects of the of the real estate family, all of you guys who are out there. Finally, in terms of timing, the consultation closes at the end of August, and we will be spending the months after that analysing your answers to your questions and making sure that when we do bring forward the next sort of iteration of performance levels and combine it with the top-down work that Jess was just talking about, that we can address all the issues that you have raised. And it's really important that we do make sure that we play back to you answers to the questions that, and make sure that there's a completely transparent kind of process for everything that's been asked. And that's one of the things that's been one of the fundamental principles of everything that everybody has done, is to ensure that, no question goes unanswered and no comment is ignored. So please, reaching out to you all, fill in the consultations. Different ways that you can perhaps engage with the consultation might be to get a few of you within your own organization to run a little lunchtime seminar on something, or talk to your industry organizations who might, amongst yourselves, be doing a little bit of work on this. One thing that we're doing at Argent, and also we're going to be doing the same at Related Argent, is actually getting one of our project teams that are working on a building to see how the consultation would have an impact on them. This is kind of an advance of beta testing. We will in due course be asking whole project teams to take the final version, the beta testing version, and actually run that through on projects as well. And be open, share your views in a blog post. We would love to hear from you at all times. We're not trying to keep this secretive. Get out there and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. And I will now hand over to Matt to take you through to the next steps.
Yeah, thank you, David. And hello, everyone. I'm Matt Collins. I work at the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors as the Construction Professional Practice and Development Lead, and I'm the RSS representative on the TSG for the standard, and also part of Task Group 1B supporting Will with the embodied carbon work. So I'm going to very, very briefly talk you through the next steps in terms of development of the standard. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. As sort of shown on that sort of high level program there, consultation is open to the end of August, and I'll add my will there for everybody to go on and complete the consultation. It's open till the end of August. But obviously, whilst the consultation period is ongoing, there's a lot of work still to do, and the work that we're doing currently kind of includes, reviewing the consultation responses that have been received to date. Looking at those sort of responses, make sure we're asking the right sorts of questions and getting the feedback on it. Development of the top-down science-based limit setting tool that Jess spoke about earlier, that work's really crucial, and that's ongoing as we speak. And essentially continue to develop more about the kind of who, what and how with verification of the standard, which is obviously going to be, really important once the standard launches in terms of, how actually buildings get verified as net zero. And also, as shown on the programme there, start developing levels of performance for existing buildings and retrofits. Will spoke a little bit about those earlier, and that's kind of the next stage, as we're currently focused on new buildings to date. I did kind of says in black at the bottom of the programme there, it's important that we stress that we're showing that we're issuing a beta testing version of the standard in the early part of 2024, but it's important to stress that all of the deliverables really on here, but that one particularly, are subject to the current ongoing funding request that's we're going through that process of at the minute, and we're currently speaking to a number of industry leaders around co-sponsoring and supporting the rest of the standard development. So a bit of a plug here, if anybody on the call thinks they or their organisation might be interested in being part of the sponsorship of the standard, please get in touch with us as a technical steering group and a governance board, and we can kind of talk about that in some more detail and what that might look like. If anybody's interested, please do get in touch. So can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. So yeah, a few numbers. A couple of these have been mentioned already, but we've had over 135 responses to the consultation to date, which is great. But obviously, we want to get that number as high as possible. We've had over 4,500 individual visits to the NZCBS website, which is great. There's a lot of information on there, and we've launched today some FAQs for the standard, and we would ask and encourage everybody to go on there and have a review of those. They really are. I think there's 20 kind of questions that we've come up with that we think, are important to let people know in terms of moving forward, and that they can share with their networks. And then really, we've had some fantastic press and social media coverage of the standard today. We've been nominated for some awards, done some really excellent work, and we're just getting the kind of the word out there, and we're going to obviously continue to actively promote and share the work that we're doing. And we would just ask everybody on this call to do the same, to share it with their networks and share their involvement in the standard if indeed you are part of a task group or a sector group, or if you've shared data or whatever. So yeah, please continue with the excellent work that's ongoing. So yeah, now I think we move over to the Q&A. I can see there's a lot of questions in there, so hand back to Will to run us through those. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So could I ask all the presenters, please turn on your cameras? We're going to have to go quite fast because we've got 15 minutes, 69 questions, which by my maths means we have 13 seconds per question. So I don't think we'll get through them all, but we'll do them in terms of upvoting. So please keep upvoting questions you'd like to see asked. I'm going to start by combining a few together. There's quite a lot of acronyms have been asked in terms of coordination. So coordination with BREEAM, Neighbours, Science Based Targets Initiative, CREM, REBA 2030 Challenge. Could one of the speakers, maybe, I don't know, Chris, could you want to start off by talking a little bit about coordination with these various other initiatives?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can speak particularly from a BREEAM perspective because BRE became involved in this project because we're very keen to see common metrics used to measure net zero carbon standards. So the specific question around how will things align, obviously we can't say until we're there, but I will say that BREEAM is currently doing an update across all our schemes that is focused on better aligning with net zero goals. As regards SBTI and CREM, I'm not so familiar with, I know something about those. So the thing that I will say that's different about what we're doing to what CREM and SBTI are doing, and that is the taking account of what is possible in the different sectors. I think SBTI and CREM are both purely based on the top down. So I think that I would say that is the distinguishing feature there. I don't know whether somebody else wants to add to that.
Sure, I can chip in a little bit more in answering to that question. So we're very much aware that we want to build on industry knowledge. So we are standing on the shoulders of work's gone before, and we're really fortunate, especially in the task group that's looking at the top-down work, that we have got some experts who were very heavily involved in the CREM work. So that knowledge is being brought along to all the discussions. In terms of the SBTI alignment, as far as I understand it, that's taking a very global view, and it's much wider perspective. We are looking, it's still science-based. We're also using that, going for that 1.5 climate mitigation, kind of that 1.5 aligned scenario. But we're looking at specific UK data. So it's based on the UK national carbon budget, and it's also based on UK stock and that growth projections. In terms of alignment to the RBA 2030 challenge, I picked that up in the Q&A. We don't know what the results are going to be, yet, but it's very much the RBA's intention that once the standard is published, that we will revise the 2030 challenge, and it will probably not be called the 2030 challenge because time is advancing apace. But we will revise and tweak the numbers in the challenge to align, with the endpoint where we need to be in 2050.
Thanks, Jess. And David, did you want to come in as well? Yeah,
just a quick one to say that we don't know the answers to that question quite yet. We appreciate that absolutely everybody is looking at, trying to get to the same thing. But, as others have said, CREM looks across the whole of Europe, GRESB looks at different accounting, PCAF looks at, et cetera, et cetera. Neighbours, for instance, can do, one bit for if you're in an office or if you're a retail occupier. What we will do at the end of it all is actually publish exactly where the standard sits in comparison with all of these. So in some cases, if you're aligning with one of those, you will be able to go some of the way towards achieving compliance with the standard. In other situations, achieving verification or compliance with the standard will allow you to then report that up to your CREM pathway or your PCAP accounting or whatever it is. So that's where we will end up. Wherever we do end up, we will publish it and we will make it clear to everybody so that people don't have to do the same thing 2 or 3 times. I think that's the main thing, is that no one needs another standard that's just sitting on the shelf and asking us all to come up with the same data in a slightly different way from everybody else. So that's what we would like to reassure everybody about.
Yeah, thanks, David. And just to say as well, there was a couple of questions in there about also coordination with the Climate Change Committee in terms of the work they've done on top-down budgets, and it's the same sort of answer again. We're not doing this in isolation with our eyes and ears close to the rest of the industry. We are working with these other parties, and we've spoken to people at the CCC through this process already. David, could you maybe just quickly, there was a question on building, on will this be mandatory or will this be optional? Could you maybe just touch briefly on this and maybe building regs and the purpose of the standard in that sort of arena?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and we are, constantly in touch with government as well about this. At the moment, they have said to us, we want you as an industry to go out there and come up with a standard that you all agree with. How that gets imposed is something I think which will again come from the market. Will it be building regs? Would it be planning? Would it be actually imposed by virtue of clients insisting on their assets achieving this standard? Would, for instance, financing come into it, whereby we can begin to start looking at both carrots and sticks in order to promote people being compliant with the standards? At the moment, we're not quite sure. At the moment, we're saying, let's just get a measurement that we all agree with, get it out there, and then see what the market does in order to be able to live up to it. We hope, as I say, right at the very beginning, by having so many people involved in it, that we are going to be getting feedback from the people who are commissioning buildings, the people who are lending to to asset owners, the people who own, vast amounts of assets. And so we will, by virtue of having their input into this, we hope that actually they will take it on board, and that groundswell will then carry it through to being the sort of, the one that everybody wants to, is looking to see as a definitive statement of their assets, net zero credentials.
Perfect, thank you. Julie, there's a question in here, and it's a very specific one, but I think it's a good broader subject to touch on, which is about sort of secondary metrics. The question is around, have you considered operational energy as a metric per person per year in homes, for example? But could you just touch on that a bit more broadly for us, please?
Yes, more broadly, not only on homes. So as I've said, thank you very much for picking that up, because I know some of you will jump to the numbers, but in a way, in many sectors, it's the least important at the moment. We really want to make sure that we get the sector understanding right, and obviously getting the right metrics is right. So in terms, as I've said, every sector in their performance levels has looked at what would be the equivalent annual energy use in kilowatt hours per square meter GIA per year. However, they were also all asked to think about what at the asset level may be more appropriate. For example, kilowatt hours per person in homes, kilowatt hours per bedroom in hotels, etc. You will see that all sectors have come up with their proposals. In majority, I would say they've actually stuck with kilowatt hours per square meter GIA per year. In some sectors, there is some analysis to explain why they ended up with which metrics, why they have discounted others. Please do comment if you think that it's right or not right. Please do provide your opinion, and again, with data, for example, on unintended consequences, if you think we've missed something with a particular metric.
Yeah, always the more data, the better. We've got a question around, so this is an embodied carbon question. How will supply chain and materials decarbonisation be taken into account? Maybe I'll start, and Matt, if you want to sort of chip in if I miss anything, but basically just to say that we're building on the work done by the UK GBC, who launched their industry roadmap in 2020. They commissioned a whole load of research looking at the various material sectors and those predictions for how those sectors would decarbonise between now and 2050. We've adopted that, we're putting it into the standard, and basically that will be used to set future embodied carbon limits. It won't affect today's limit, but it will affect the limit, say, for a project complete in the year 2030. So we are trying to account for that as we go. Matt, did you want to add anything to that before we move on?
No, not really. We'll only to say that, yeah, I mean, that's probably a really good example of where we're kind of building on the work that the industry's done. We're not kind of starting this thinking that, we've got all the, we're starting again with everything that's been done. This really is about bringing all the excellent work that's been done prior to this standard forming, if you like, to build upon that and taking that forward. Nothing more than that around the technical work. It is, we've got what's there and we're going to use it. So
great, thanks. Jess, one for you. Oh, it's gone. I was going to ask Jess if you could, maybe you were typing an answer. Could you just talk a bit about the sort of beyond carbon question that was being asked? I think you might have been typing an answer to it, but maybe just for everyone's benefit.
Sure, yes, I was just typing the answer to say that this really responds, the standard responds to an ask from industry to define what are the characteristics, what is the common shared characteristics of performance whereby an asset can call itself net zero carbon, to bring that to a level playing field. And it's not trying to be a much more holistic sustainability standard. There are others out there, and it's to be viewed complementary rather than replacing anything else in terms of biodiversity or circularity or toxicity or any of the other things that were mentioned. But I have typed an answer, which you can have a look at in the answered questions chat box.
Perfect, thanks, Jess. Yeah, I mean, we would all love to go beyond carbon. We are all massive sustainability enthusiasts, but it's hard enough trying to do this, one single metric, let alone everything else. So we're trying to walk before we can fly. We've got a question on, I guess this is the top-down work that just says, how were the pathways derived and what data sources were used? I guess we don't have time to go into detail, but would either, I don't know, Jess or Chris, do one of you want to come in on that briefly?
Great, so thank you very much. So we in terms of the pathways, where we're looking at that work now, that's it's live work that's happening now in the functional model. We are very fortunate to be working with experts who've been involved in the UK GBC roadmap. Who, we're talking with the CCC. We're also building on people's experience in CREM, all of those things that we mentioned before. We're using those three strands of work that I mentioned in the presentation, the stock model. So that's obviously really important in terms of dividing the carbon budget across the current, but also the growth that we're expecting across the different typologies and the different sectors within the built environment. And then looking at the EUIs, the current ones, and then informing that with the, combining that with the bottom-up work. So that we haven't sort of got all the answers yet. This work is really being fleshed out at the moment. In terms of looking at the carbon budgets, I saw there was a question about that earlier. We've had our group look at a really sort of defined 14 characteristics in terms of the type of budget, the carbon budget to use, and it's sort of worth mentioning that none of them satisfy all those criteria, but the proposal and the recommendation is to use the CCC's budget, but that it's going to be tweaked to be consumption based, because as a matter of principle, the standard, we believe that we should be responsible for the carbon, the embodied carbon in construction materials and products that are produced elsewhere and imported to our country. So other countries should not be penalised for the growth in our construction industry. So the ways of, we're looking at how we're going to calculate and how we're going to adapt that so that we have a consumption-based budget.
Thanks, Jess. And I guess we've probably only got time for one more question. So I'm going to give the last question to David, maybe. Question says, is there a directory set up for products, materials, etc., that would help to achieve the standards? And so I wondered if you just close by, talk about how this standard, what it does and doesn't do in terms of that.
Well, at the moment, we are both technology and other standards agnostic. We're setting targets, we're setting limits, we're doing it with a metric which we believe everybody has bought into. Certainly all the various different bodies who are represented here and in all the various different task groups are on the same page for this. So again, coming back to that point about once the market gets on to adopt all of this lot, then we believe market mechanisms will begin to start measuring their own technology and measuring their own outputs in exactly the same way, so as to comply with the standard. And I think it's that way round. I've actually just over the weekend been reading Mike Berners-Lee book on how bad are your bananas, which actually adds up the carbon content of every single item from that can go through, from your supermarket trolley right through to you flying to New York or whatever. And it's a very complex process. We are working with government. We're working with an organization called Net Zero Now about how the supply chain within the construction industry could begin to start taking these metrics and saying, okay, how do I then begin to start telling people what the carbon content of my specific product is, how much carbon will it generate when it's being used, etc. So all of these things are things that we think that that are going to be necessary to be able to build an entire picture of the carbon impact of an asset. That's what we're after. If we can make it as simple as possible, if we can align industry and we can align all designers, suppliers, contractors, etc., to come around to measure in the same way, then we've got a hope. And that's what everybody's doing here, is just getting that metric right, and getting the level playing field that's been referred to earlier. That's the key.
Thank you, David. So with that, thank you all for giving up an hour of your Monday to join us today. Sorry we didn't get through all the questions. We will read through the remaining ones and work out what to do with them after this call. And enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you very much, everybody.